Well, the question that has, challenged humanity for a very, very long time. Does God exist? You know, what is God's nature? All those sort of interesting questions that humanity has had. I mean, up until about 2010, I was an atheist myself, very much believed in that science had, sorted it all out, worked it all out. We were just, it was just the minor touches that were required to settle a whole lot of different questions. But as time went on, more and more questions started appearing, more contradictions, more weaknesses in the explanation, more uncertainty in whether the so-called scientific method was actually using science in the traditional sense, or whether it had corrupted itself into a sort of ideology of scientism, a sort of an ideology creating its own sort of faith, in a sense. And, like a lot of people, you have moments where you're starting to doubt all sorts of things. You're starting to look deeper into things. Then I had my heart attack, and it gets you thinking about these questions. Does God exist? Are we just a clump of matter that randomly has come together? Is it all meaningless? All these sort of questions that countless philosophers from antiquity to this day have pondered and asked, in a sense. But I think for me, the big turning point was in 2010 when the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, the particle accelerator in CERN in Switzerland, got to those higher energies and was able to demonstrate that supersymmetry does not exist, or we couldn't find proof for it. So, I mean, a lot of people probably have heard about the God particle, the Higgs boson. They've probably heard about the Higgs field, in which all other particles sort of come from. But what most people aren't aware of or haven't heard, and it's more within the scientific world, is that what they were trying to find was a solution to an intractable problem in science and the philosophy of science, and also the philosophy of atheism. Because up until the discovery that there was some sort of beginning, which we sort of dub the Big Bang, but it's really something which we can't explain exactly, something that comes out of the metaphysical realm. It's extremely, like we use a word of singularity, something extremely dense, small, that came about 13.8 billion years ago. And that's, obviously there have been recent people that have basically said, no, it's actually longer than that. When they went back and actually redid the maths, they realised that those distant galaxies that our, recent space telescope saw was actually within the time frame of the existing universe of 13.8 billion. It doesn't mean it's 13.8 billion years. That's what we can perceive by looking at the distance of light traveling. But at the end of the day, inflation is something that appeared. We know it appeared because there's no other way of explaining this growth, this rapid growth of the universe, and then it's sort of slowing down. It's still the universe is still getting larger and larger and sort of expanding and expanding, and things are being pushed. Galaxies are being pushed apart, and in a very distant future, will be whoever's around will be in a single universe, a single galaxy universe, and they will not be able to see the event horizon of the Big Bang. They won't be able to see the artifact of that proof, because a lot of those wavelengths of the microwave background radiation, as it's called, those wavelengths will have stretched so much over the distance of time in the future that you'll no longer have evidence. And you'll basically, think, well, the universe has been here forever. This is what was believed up until recently, until the early part of until the 20th century. It was believed that the universe was eternal, had been here for ages, was a clockwork universe. Some believed God created it. Others believed it just was. Many of the scientists believed in that sort of atheist, sort of just been here forever. And so once people started investigating the properties, which is sort of trying to understand what the universe is made of, how it's made of, what are the laws that govern it, the more we pursued that investigation with experiment, each experiment started creating more questions. And obviously, when Hubble sort of discovered this expanding universe, and then there was more research by a number of others to determine the sort of the signature of that early creation, which we call the microwave background radiation. As we started measuring all these things, obviously the sort of atheist notion that the universe has been here forever, it's eternal, and there is no beginning, that started falling apart. So since the 60s, more or less early 60s, scientists have been trying to find another way of removing God from the picture completely. So over time, they investigated other mathematical solutions. And that actually, it's in itself actually indicates God, because maths, if it was part of this universe, what does it describe, or you can actually design, create things like the Mandelbrot, all sorts of weird and strange mathematical constructs. If it actually comes from this universe, it's a product of this universe. Why is it describing things that do not exist in this universe and seems to permeate into the metaphysical realm? But that's for another day. People that have actually looked into mathematics realize that it's a language that is beyond the space-time universe that we live in, that we reside in. I call it the language of creation, of God, the Logos. But anyway, that's for another day. Then when we look and investigate the sciences, we actually start realizing that the world is very complex. Biology is very complex. This couldn't just come about from just randomness. You've got a situation where when you look at the machinery inside a cell, it's so complex. There's machines, nano machines. If you look at these, are biological machines where these protein structures are very complex and are codified with a language, which is like a binary code. So because the fundamental four letters that constitute those basic biological building sort of blocks, your A, T, C, G sort of letters in their combinations, they actually create this binary sort of code of the DNA. That indicates a mind, that indicates language that only a mind can produce. The mathematics itself is also a language which only a mind can produce, and it actually is a language which is not tied or restricted or anchored in this universe, in this material world. So those are important distinctions that scientists won't tell you openly, especially the atheist ones, but this is the reality, that the universe, the material universe that we reside in, that's underpinned by these laws, these laws, these mathematics, these things that they presuppose existed or exist or come from this universe, was a very difficult thing, because when we look at the complexity, it's just not enough time to basically allow for this level of complexity to occur. You can throw in all sorts of chemistry into a bowl and leave it there for 1 billion years. It will not manifest into life. It will not manifest into some sort of structure, in particular because you've got entropy. That means the underlying force in the universe, that decay, the breakdown of matter. Things are basically, the further back you go to the beginning, there's less entropy. Closer to the creation, the further away from the creation point, there is more and more entropy increasing in the system. Things are pulling apart, falling apart, decaying. And so that's another one of those paradoxes that can't be answered by scientism, and that's something they won't tell you, or they'll hide it, or they'll mislabel it, or use language which is, let's say, deceptive, I believe, because they don't have an answer. Rather than being honest and saying, look, we just don't have an answer, that would be the honest thing to say, rather than using convoluted language to hide the obvious in that regard. So science has spent, since the early, probably about 62, trying to develop a mathematical sort of construct to be able to explain why we have a complex universe and how it could manifest in such a small amount of time. So there were two paths in that. One was, you don't need a God in the metaphysical realm. In the metaphysical realm, in terms of Neoplatonism, because that was also the philosophy of Neoplatonism, is that there is these, like anybody's read Plato, he believed that there was a perfect form of everything that exists in the universe in this metaphysical realm, like a perfect desk, a perfect table, a perfect chair, a perfect human, a perfect everything. That from that template, that icon, that image, comes all these other forms. Now, for obviously modern science, you know, is trying to go beyond that philosophical found belief system to say that, well, there are these strings that pretty much vibrate and actually create all the particles that exist in the universe. And from those particles manifest all matter. So that was one way of actually eliminating God and saying, well, we've got this. But in order for that to be possible, you have to have something which is called supersymmetry. That means these particles must be arranged in a certain way, and have a certain amount, quantities of the different types, to basically allow for this supersymmetry to be possible. Okay, I'll just give you one thing. There's less muons than would allow for supersymmetry. That's just one thing that we discovered back in 2010 and 2011 at the particle accelerator. The other thing is we found this Higgs field, which we could only generate within the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider. I'll just use the LHC to make it easy for everyone. That actually was actually affirmed again, and then it was definitively the actual Higgs field was proven definitively by 2012. So that pretty much nailed it and said, well, since this is the way subatomic particles come into existence, this is the way these fundamental particles that make up the universe come about, and they don't have this evenness. That means this allowing, they're not in the amounts that allow for this supersymmetry to be possible. Then the ability to be able to have string, the concept of string theory, pretty much falls apart. Now, they're arguing, some of the people that have spent decades wasting their whole careers on this theoretical mumbo jumbo without any proof. The experiment just nailed them, pretty much. They're now trying to resurrect it with some other concoction, saying, oh, we may at higher energies find something else, or some sort of other energies, well, maybe the uncreated energies of God you may detect, but you're not going to detect anything else. They're hoping that they may be able to find something that is able to reconcile the experimental anomalies, as they would consider them, that may help resurrect their theories that they've spent decades and decades wasting their time on bullshit. So that's one part. The other part is for the complexity story. So obviously that means, all right, this Neoplatonist realm of perfect forms, these strings that can bring about everything in the universe. And on the other hand, how do you get complexity in a universe that's 13.8 billion years? Well, that's their argument. It could be even younger, could be, really young. None of us know, because if God created it, he could create things instantaneously at any time. He could decay things at any rate. There's no way, impossible, for us to know how long the so-called creation. We know even from the Bible that days, the so-called 7 days or days, are actually used interchangeably between long periods of time and short periods of time, even less than a day, or a longer length, or long periods of time. So the problem is, because of the grammar of the early Hebrew language, there's a problem with the commas and stuff like that. It's a bit Arab, other Semitic language like Arab are just, the early types are just gibberish. And the same thing with with ancient Greek. And depending where you put the comma, you can reverse the meaning completely. This was the problem of a lot of earlier languages, their scripture and stuff like that. So that creates a lot of problems in terms of what is meant by a day. So we need to get our heads away from that and say, we don't know, and stop trying to argue from this absolutist view just because the modern languages are translations of older languages which have these ambiguities. Okay. They don't retract from the faith. They just basically explain things. There is certain ambiguity in terms of what they mean in a length of time. So we need to walk away from that because we don't know. It's just simple as that. And to argue from a position where there is linguistic issues associated with what that length of time is just a nonsense argument. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect my faith in that regard. Now, as far as, the scientific method, if we can actually find and determine length of time, that's fine. I have no problems with the scientific method of that. Are these methods accurate? We think so, but we don't really know with 100% certainty. So we always should keep that in mind. But even if it was double the 13.8 billion, even 4 times longer, which I don't believe is, but anyway, even if it was, that wouldn't be an issue. And there's still not enough time for the complexity. So again, in order to basically allow you to undertake complexity, you would have to have a way of generating varied types of universes that would allow you to create these slight variations, random slight variations, which would bring about what we have today. So that would require, like you would have like 99.9999999% of the universes, which are just crap, and 0.00001 or whatever that can manifest some sort of life or the life that we have in this universe. Maybe even more complex life in another universe than this. But it would be an infinitesimal small amount of those successful universes where they're just dividing and dividing and dividing. But for that to happen, you need 11 dimensions for these universes to be able to pop into existence and split off from each other like a tree, sort of. It's the branching off into all sorts of variations, all like cells, divide and divide and divide, and create a lot of slightly varied from the original. So something like that would have to happen in the universe. But to have that happen, again, to get away from the 4-dimensional space-time universe that we live in, you would have to have supersymmetry. Again, supersymmetry is fundamental to both the multiverse and string theory. So to be able to explain complexity, you need supersymmetry. In order to explain away God, the metaphysical realm, and create a Neoplatonist sort of explanation for that realm of perfect strings that bring about all the different particles, you would again require to have supersymmetry. Since experimentally, that is, empirically, we have tested this. We have proven that there is no supersymmetry. Doesn't exist. Now, some people think that if you go higher energies, they may find some other thing that may allow for some sort of supersymmetry. It's just imaginary nonsense. Because and a number of people have thrown in the towel and have said it's bullshit. They're just trying to resurrect something that's been completely and utterly discredited with experimental evidence. Now, there's been plenty of experiments done at CERN, at the LHC, that have confirmed that supersymmetry doesn't exist, that what we know is, confirmed the particles that are a part of the standard model, and the imaginary scientism model has failed to materialize in the way they believed it would. So the standard model that they believed would materialize through these experiments has collapsed, and we have what we have. So our standard model is one which does not require supersymmetry to exist. But because without supersymmetry, you can't have multiple dimensions. Without supersymmetry, you can't have string that can bring about all the matter in the universe without requiring a mind of God. Pretty much it upends the entire belief system of scientism, which is the atheist belief system that underpins science. Remember, faith isn't against science. The modern science was actually developed by people of faith. Many of them were people that were even priests and bishops in the early church that continued pursuing scientific knowledge and scientific understanding and trying to understand God's creation. So they were not anti-science. It's those who emerged later with, you could say, the so-called enlightened period. I don't think it's that enlightened. Let's not forget the enlightened period was a very violent period full of revolutions, and let's say the guillotine ran red for a long time, and a lot of, so when they use the word enlightened, they just mean that, we don't need God. That's what they mean enlightened. We worked it all out philosophically, we don't need a deity in that to create this universe. So that's really what it is fundamentally. It has nothing to do with democracy, because they try and actually saddle all these things. Well, even under Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, the Christian Empire, there was local rights, and even the local authorities, the people could vote the emperor out of the city. So there was some level of, those underlying republican democratic sort of traditions still existing in that part. So it was just lost in the western part when the Germanic tribes conquered the Western Roman Empire, and you basically collapsed into a dark age and savagery. Well, I remember when the East was defeated by the Ottomans in the end, and then all the intellectuals, the Greek intellectuals, came across because they'd had a Renaissance 200 years earlier. That's well recorded. So it originated back in Greece again, in the city of Constantinople. So these intellectuals and merchants and people moved to northern Italy, and they re-established it there. They weren't people who the early Greek universities that still exist to this day. You can go and visit them and see them and read the Greek writing outside from that period of time. It's in the stone, the evidence. So that knowledge came from that part of the world. So it came from the Christian world and permeated the rest of Europe. Unfortunately, because of Reformation, it took a really bizarre sort of direction, And from that came, the sort of your modern movements of atheism and all these other things that came about. They were more of a consequence of economic and social upheaval that had happened due to wars and things like that, and less to do with really any enlightenment in that regard. I wouldn't consider some of the brutal ways that Napoleon and many others had operated within the European theatre as enlightened. Okay, in the Christian world, in Tsarist Russia, they had cooperatives and they had a whole lot of other programs. Where do you think the kibbutz idea of the Jews comes from? Do you think it comes from socialism in Europe? No, it comes from Christian orthodoxy in Russia. That whole idea. That's where most of these Jews left Eastern Europe and came into Central Europe, and then ended up back in their own old homeland, but nothing to do with the sort of enlightened period. There's a lot of propaganda in this space that has tried to promote these sort of ideas. Even Tsarist Russia wasn't, this some sort of authoritarian, monstrous sort of system. That's what came after, which Lenin put into power. Okay, so let's just be honest about that. What had happened. That's for another day, another discussion, and another to provide evidence for all of that sort of stuff. But the science is quite definitive. There is no supersymmetry. There is no possibility of a universe just popping into existence, or it to manifest in more than one form in multiverse and be allowed to generate randomly all this complexity. When we look at the time constraint of the existence of this universe, that time constraint does not permit for the complexity that we see. We know that only a mind like ours can create code, binary code, machine code, language. What we see in nature is exactly that. We see design, we see complexity, we see information. Matter on its own cannot create information. Only a mind can create information. We know that. All the matter in the universe may be driven by the different, strong, weak nuclear force, gravity, all these forces. And they have an absolute value. If they didn't, this universe wouldn't be what it is. But those underpinnings allow for the universe to behave in a certain way, for things to have a gravitational effect on each other in a certain way. But that's it. And even chemistry, as I said, cannot create information. Matter, the laws of nature and chemistry have no ability to create information. You can throw anything in a petri dish and wait for it, and you can wait for billions of years and nothing will happen. For life to exist and be encoded, that information needs an architect. Now, obviously, some of the atheists recently have run away because they can't explain this, and now some of them are touting, you've probably heard people like Richard Dawkins talking about panspermia. Some, aliens have come here and created, and I go, well, who created them, and how much time existed for them to come about? That's another question he can't explain. So it's just nonsense, gibberish. To when you don't have, just say I don't know. And that would be at least honest to say I don't know. I can't prove atheism. I don't know. I may be wrong. That would be an honest explanation, but they just can't help themselves. They just cannot extricate themselves from their own scientism, their own delusions, ideology. They're ideologues, you know. So they have a faith as well, just like us, theists. They have a faith as well. That's not that they don't have any foundation. At least we can say we have a faith that permeates into the metaphysical realm, and there is proof for that from the scientific method. So something they can't argue, because Big Bang, the microwave background radiation, the lack of supersymmetry, all these things that have been discovered in recent times have just basically the information in the digital information in matter, the programming of organic matter, its ability to withstand entropy, because it's programmed to function in a certain physiological way. Our favourite, our favourite particle, taurine, that has regulates, is as an osmolyte, has anti-entropic properties. Yes, but that's for another day, another video, to look at biophysics to show that information. But yes, it shows quite clearly that there is a lot of design there, and very good design from our Father, our Creator. So that's sort of covering that general science in a very basic way. We don't need to go into complexity. Not everybody's a physicist to go into the details. And it's just showing the contradictions of what the atheists argue, and that they don't have a foundation in what they're actually saying. You know, I've got no problems that DNA is coded in a certain way that can actually interact with its environment and evolve and adjust. You know, viruses do have evolutionary properties. They interact and all that. I have no problems with that. But I haven't seen a transitional species of any note, and I haven't seen any evidence. You know, if there was so much transition that took place, evolutionary transition, not adaptive evolution, where are all the transitional species? Don't exist. If you put a slab of meat out in the open, guess what happens to it? It decays and breaks down to nothing. You know, you don't get fossils. You know when you get fossils? When you get something like a, cataclysm, some great event where flooding happens, rapid flooding happens in an area, and all the mud and all that and the soil turned over with organisms. When the water goes away and that dries out, it fossilizes, because it traps the organic matter. And when it traps the organic matter, guess what happens? Oxygen can't get to it. So it becomes fossilized. The other problem is also that carbon-14 and all these things also get affected. You get different readings. They don't tell you that. And also that they've actually found in fossilized stuff, so-called records of dinosaurs and other species, they've actually found soft tissue. Well, how does that survive? There's a lot of questions. They say, well, we'll find the solutions. They argue. But, I'm not giving you arguments of God in the gaps. There's no gaps here that I'm talking about. There is no mathematics that can actually come out of nothingness. There is no coding that can happen without a mind. That's just not possible. There isn't enough time or supersymmetry to allow certain things that they argue are necessary for their presuppositions, their belief system, to be valid. So They're the ones with the gaps, not us. They've got gaping gaps in their whole theology of atheism. We don't. We have science actually backing up, to a large extent, that there has to be something beyond space-time, that a mind that created this. Obviously, the last refuge of charlatans who can't prove what they argue is to run and hide or make up shit like panspermia from Richard Dawkins, or some of the more recent fanatics of the atheist cult have come up with now, oh, we're living in a simulation. Doesn't a simulation require a mind? Well, you can call it whatever you like. Alien, God, whatever. It still requires a mind to set up a simulation. Even if we were part of a simulation. I don't believe that anyway. Within my own Christian Christology, we believe matter is real. It exists in that regard. And the way science describes it is valid. So we have no problems with matter. That's one of the natures of Christ. One is divine and one is matter, human matter. So we have no problems with that as well. We do have a problem with people saying that it's a simulation, because the reality is their whole concept of a so-called simulation is bollocks, basically. They've got no foundation for it. They've got no scientific evidence for it. It is a philosophical belief system. They've got nothing else to go to. So they've gone, well, since the universe doesn't have supersymmetry, we can't explain any of this in a material world. So they've given up on materialism and they've run and hide into nonsensical idealism, and come up with sort of this romantic notion of a simulated universe. Somebody's been watching too much, shows. Keanu, the type of Keanu Reeves type shows, I'd have to say. Yes. Unfortunately, that's where we've ended. Yes, maybe the robots have taken over, and we're all in a simulation created by the robots. Yes, I'm in my pod and all that. Well, that's where some of these atheists would like to stick you. Globalist atheists would like to stick you in a pod and control you. Don't be silly and go willingly into the pod. The people of faith, we've got plenty to back us up. Now, people will say, well, what about all these different belief systems that exist on the planet? Every single one of these belief systems believes in that either they are the universe or they are God, and they're deluding themselves about it's all fantasy, what exists around them. No different than basically the sort of nonsense with a simulation. Or the universe has been eternal. Science has proven that wrong. So all the pagan religions believe the universe was eternal and just brought about all the gods and everything else. Well, no, the universe is not eternal. It's created and it has a beginning. We may not have the exact time of that beginning. We can argue about it, but in the end, we do have experimental and observational evidence that there was a beginning. So, nobody can argue. So all we're left is pretty much, the Jewish and Christian faith. The problem with Islam is it's a heresy of Christianity. It comes out of Arianism, which deny the divinity of Christ, even though it believes, if you read the Quran, it actually says that Christ will come back and he will basically be the one that will determine who goes to paradise and who doesn't, or in the final judgment. Well, that's supposed to be God's role. How can Christ not be divine? And it's bizarre. Anyway, it's because Arianism existed in Baghdad and Damascus at the time, and these merchants from the Arab Peninsula, a lot of that information moved back and forward, and then it manifested into a different form. We know that, so it's more of a cult that's grown into a religion from that. But it's not a revelation, in my personal opinion. People may disagree, but it's not a revelation. There's coins from that era, from the early caliphs, where they were holding two crosses. And the argument is, they were just using Byzantium coins and changing the image. If you can change the image on a coin, you can change the symbols on a coin. Wouldn't you think? 200 years later, those Christian symbols don't exist, and we have the sort of pagan symbols of the Arabian Peninsula of the crescent moon. That's when you had that sort of fusion that took place, and you have the emergence of the sort of faith, the way it manifested itself within the Arab Peninsula. But the revelations are quite clear from prophets. God used a people to basically reveal himself, and he even told them that there'll be a Messiah that will come later on, and he'll be crucified and all these sort of things. Some of the prophets actually said these things. So if we look in the Old Testament, and we've actually found scrolls from before Christ that actually validate this sort of stuff. So it's not us making shit up. There is archaeological evidence backing these early scripts. So that information has come through, because even the priesthood of the Jews, they didn't accept things until they came to pass. So what a prophet said, unless they came to pass, they weren't accepted as a prophet. Okay? It's like saints in the way in Christianity. We don't accept them until there's miracles and things of actually which they've said and done, certain things come to pass. And then we can say, okay, they are predicting future events and they are affecting other people, like Paisios, which was in the previous century, who there were people from all over the world that just turned up to this illiterate man and were speaking to him, and they actually said he was like glowing, and he could how they understood, or how he understood all these different languages is beyond anyone's belief. But there must have been a strong presence of the Holy Spirit inside him for that to be possible. There's no other way of explaining it. So anyway, I'll cover this in some future videos in terms of dwelling deeper in certain things, spirituality and faith and stuff like that. But we do have a faith that is grounded in strong experimental and scientific evidence, not just what has been revealed by God or the prophets. Look, people had a certain literacy level. They will explain things, and you have to remember that the Bible is the history of our relationship with God. It's not written by God. It's not transcribed by God, okay? It is revelation. And then humans will have recorded what they heard and what they were told, okay? And you can get slight issues. We'll discuss those later on. They're not very important. They're usually grammatical mistakes, grammatical issues, and all sorts of other things, but they don't detract from the main messages, which is important in that regard. I'll give you an example of one prophet who was taken up by an angel and saw the earth, and, obviously had no knowledge of physics, and described it when he came back to the priesthood, who had challenged him and asked him questions and all that. He described, I can't remember which one it was. It'll come back to me, but at the wrong time. But he basically said it was, this rounded ball in the sky that was hanging there, but without a string. Because, if you've got a rounded ball hanging with a string, you can understand that. But if you don't understand gravity, you don't understand all these things, it just seems weird. How the hell is the Earth just that rounded ball just standing there in space? How does it do that? Obviously, it's going to be explained in those simplistic terms. But that's a revelation, but it explained in simple terms. It's not, the book is not meant to be a religious, scientific, that's for scientists to do. As we say in our faith, to that which is Caesar's is Caesar's, to that which is God's, God's. We do faith. Religious people do faith. Scientists do understanding, working out how the universe works, the creation, this world that God created for us. Two different professions, but you can be a believer in God in both professions, so to speak, or in both areas of expertise, so to speak. Religious people have their role to bring people close to God, to develop a relationship with God. That's their role, and it's a role to be a spiritual leader, to assist people when they have doubts, difficulties with faith, and they're struggling with personal issues or whatever else. That is their role. It's to show love to those people and help them. That's their role. Very similar the way Christ, but also to be strong, because most people don't understand is they think, the modern conception, unfortunately, with a lot of young people is we have this Jesus guy, which he looks like a hippie guy, the way he's projected, all lovey-dovey and all that sort of stuff. Absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. If you read the actual scripture where it actually says to turn the cheek, right after that, what does it say? To be good and call that person out if they're doing wrong things. So it's misunderstood what it means. It means that you shouldn't be, if somebody believes the wrong things, you shouldn't basically just nail them down. You shouldn't be basically too forceful to basically criticize them and attack them. That's what it means, because that was Peter. Peter was doing that on a number of occasions. He even tried to pull out a sword to kill somebody who disagreed with Christ. He was trying to tell him, stop doing that. You need to basically show these people love and try and win them over. But if they do evil, they do the wrong thing. We're not pacifists. Do the wrong thing. You've got a right to fight evil, both with the sword or not. That's why he never told them to throw away the sword. Told them to put it away, not to throw it away. So the sword is still useful to fight physically against those who are physically doing evil. Those who are also mentally doing evil, you should show them love and try to convince them of their errors in their thinking, to bring them closer to God again, because the evil one is trying to pull them away from God, in a vengeful way, trying to, because that corrupting the image of God, which we are, is one way of getting back at God. That's why the evil one is jealous of us, because we have this relationship, this divine relationship. That's the difference, because we're created in the image. And that's, we have the Holy Spirit in us. It's powerful. And we could either suppress it with evil thinking and doings, or we can actually like St. Paisios, become more saintly, and actually it can glow inside us. And, that is a choice, a free choice. We have free will. That is why there's evil in the world, because we have free will to manifest evil. So it's our free will. God would rather that we did the right thing, but it's up to us, our free will. He doesn't deny us that. He's not an authoritarian God who will deny you your freedom. He gives you your freedom, but asks you to have a loving relationship with him voluntarily. You can't force somebody to love you. Something which the Western church forgot and lost and persecuted a lot of people. That's why there's more atheism in the West, because of that Germanic takeover and the corruption of the Western church, which became more warlike, more brutal in trying to force, witch hunting and all this sort of craziness. We know there's evil in the world, but you can't basically go around butchering people, then you're behaving no different than jihadis. That's not the way you win people over to God. You win them over with love, but that doesn't mean you kneel to their altar of evil either. If somebody's doing evil in this world, you oppose it. If somebody's trying to force you to change your belief system, you hold strong to your belief system, even if you have to be martyred for it. That's true martyrdom, love for Christ and being willing to be martyred. Martyring isn't suicidal, going and getting yourself killed. If you can avoid being martyred, you avoid. But if you've got no option and you're pressured, either you reject Christ or you get knocked off, you get knocked off. That's what martyring is. Because of your love for Christ, he will not forsake you. He's the only one, a true loving God, who came into his own creation to save us. It's a bit like, a judge. He judged us because we did evil, we did wrong. So we were judged and found guilty correctly. But then, like a judge would walk down and go and pay our debt, he did the same thing. He came into time and space to pay the bill, to save us. What a loving God. All he asks is for us to love him back, to be saved. Not much to ask for. We fight and squabble and seek love and kindness. And here it is, unrequited, being given by God to us. And many of us reject it. Yeah, we need our head examined when we do that. We definitely do need our head examined when we do that those sort of foolish things. Because we need to remember that good does not mean lovey-dovey. Okay? There is good and there is nice. Nice people, Lucifer was nice. Okay? Deceptive and nice. Good people, a good father, cares, loves, but also punishes and also calls out wrongness. That's a good man that calls out the wrong in the world. A nice person covers it all up and says, oh, yeah, you're okay. You can go and do all your sins and all that. I'm going to be nice to you. I'm going to butter your bread. All these sayings are evil because they're not helping you establish a relationship with your Creator. They're trying to force you apart. So so-called nice can be demonic. We need to be good and have standards and have red lines. That's what we need to be truly trying to be more godlike in our behaviours with our standards and all that. Now, is it easy? Bloody hell, it's not. I'm one of the biggest sinners you can see in this world. And, you know, I don't know whether I'm going to make it with all the things that I've done in my life in the past. I know he's a forgiving father, and I hope he does forgive me for all those things. But it's not enough to just, hope in that. It's to basically try and be better myself, help where I can help within my capacity. We all have capacity to do better, but it's really up to us and all that. Sitting around and, I will criticize evil ideas. I don't hate people. I don't hate Bill Gates. I don't hate any of these people. I hate what they believe in. I hate their demonic beliefs, their beliefs that are evil and nasty and harm other people. I hate the evil that they actually push through the world. That's what I hate. I don't hate them as a human because they are created in the image of God. If I could change them and bring them closer to God again, I would, if I had the capacity. That's what a good person does. A nice person just butters their bread to be nice. See the difference between a truly masculine good man and a simp who's nice and butters your bread because they want to exploit. That's why it's manipulation. It's a manipulation method, being nice. And people, unfortunately, in the modern world, they've been with so much propaganda, they've misunderstood niceness for good, which is unfortunate. But, niceness is manipulation. Good is when you've got values, red lines, and sometimes even, being harsh and critical is good because you're calling out evil and you're calling out wrong behaviour. That's actually doing good. Evil is being nice about everything so you don't have to take on evil, which is no different than denying God. By denying God, because you could be killed, you could basically suffer, you could be criticised within your work environment. He's just another one of those God people or whatever. The way you're discounted in that regard. You've got to make a choice whether you're going to be nice or you're going to be good. Being good has its downsides, has some suffering that goes with it. But out of that, you become a better person and you become closer to God and you walk in his footsteps. When you understand that it ultimately is to have that spiritual relationship with Christ, that divine spiritual relationship, which in the East we call theosis, something which has been lost, the spiritual side. It's very business-like, mechanical. That sort of side has been lost in the West, unfortunately. Some people are trying to find it, but it's to a large extent it's been lost, unfortunately. You still have a bit of it in sort of the more traditional parts of Catholicism, but in the sort of the more general sort of secular type of Catholicism that now exists, it's been largely lost, which is awful. There seems to be some interest, even at the top, for embracing orthodoxy. Again, there's been recognitions with the letters that were sent to Alexandria, recognising that the so-called papal supremacy and all that was bullshit. So there have been a number of steps in the 20th century, in the 21st century, to try and actually roll back the schism. But there's still a big chasm because of Vatican II created this massive chasm between, if there is any union, it'll be probably with the traditional Catholics, but not with the Vatican II types. The Vatican II types of, I don't know. I'll pray for them, but I sort of feel that a lot of them are lost souls, have departed from the true faith in a very big way. But the more traditionalists, I have more hope that they can come closer to the early church. Time will tell in that regard. People say, well, if you're not part of the early church, the Eastern Orthodox rites, won't you be saved? That's not for me to say. The two thieves were saved at the last moment as Christ had been crucified. So while there is that tradition from the early priesthood within the Jewish faith all the way through, that you must have this connection with God, I think there's heresies, as it was explained to me once, that heresy is when you know the truth and you reject it. These people are not heretics, okay? We seem to confuse. In the West, anybody that disagrees back in those days with the Pope was a heretic. That's wrong. It's actually when you know the faith is wrong, but because it's for worldly things, for the worldly things that we live in, for worldly interests, financial, whatever, we basically ignore the truth and we do evil, we do the wrong thing. But if somebody's any type of person, they don't have to be even a Christian. If they live in a similar way to the way Christ would expect a person with moral, with living in the right way, I suspect they will be saved, like those two criminals by the grace of God, that they will be saved because they are unaware. They don't know the faith. They've just, asked, because we all have the Holy Spirit inside us, because we are created in the image of God. We are connected to God in a sense. And so in that regard, we all know right from wrong, good from evil, in every single culture. So we can justify things in a certain way, but we all underlying know when we're doing wrong. Even a small child knows when it's doing wrong or doing right. So that knowledge was acquired very early by Adam and Eve. Okay, so we know that that's been genetically put into us now. We know both. And as a consequence, if you do the right thing, even if you're not aware, there is another path of grace and salvation. So unlike some other groups, we don't basically consider these people heretics. We consider that they have not known Christ, but God has shown that there are many ways to salvation. not just through the church. But if you are connected and you have a connection, a spiritual connection with God, and then you reject it, then you've openly rejected and gone against God. It's not like you've deliberately done that. That's when you're a heretic, and that's when, you're really disconnecting yourself from salvation. So we need to understand how these things were explained from how the early church understood these things. This is why what happened in the West was a disaster. And I put it down that the collapse of the Western Roman Empire and the Germanic tribes coming in and dominating it and manipulating the church for political reasons and changing it in some respects, lost that sort of that spiritual sort of foundation that the early church had, which I only see in the East. Even the Oriental Orthodox Christians who they have theological problems with us. They view Christ in the most simplistic way. They basically consider that there's not two natures, human and divine. There's just one type of nature, which is sort of divine human, sort of a hybrid type thing that they've manifested. But that creates problems with with what is God, because you've got the three persons. Then you're actually introducing into the Trinity nature, and nature means something different. So linguistically, it creates philosophical contradictions in the Trinity, or the way the early church understood God. But they're probably the closest to us, in a sense, if we exclude that component in terms of their spirituality, because they did not fight Arianism and bring about the filioque, which sort of created duality, where Christ and the Father were sort of slightly more of greater importance compared to the Holy Spirit. And I think that's where the West lost its spirituality, because it saw the sort of the Holy Spirit more of as a messenger, rather than that the Holy Spirit resides inside us as God inside us, filling us with his divine presence. And when we move toward reject God and move away from God, we are diminishing that, which makes the other guy happy, the evil one happy, who's jealous of us, who wasn't created in the image like us. And when we get closer and become more saintly, because we're walking in the footsteps of Christ, so we become more saintly, the Holy Spirit becomes stronger inside us, because we create this spiritual connection with our Creator. And this is the sort of difference that you will find between Eastern Christianity, which has not lost its early Christian spirituality, and the West, which, because of the Enlightenment, all these other political movements and many other modernist sort of things that have happened, and modern innovations, faith is faith. It doesn't, it's been given to us. The last person, there was no prophet after Christ. He made it quite clear. It was the apostles and then the church. It was quite clear that there were nothing after that. And it was, with Pentecost, it was set in stone. That is the doctrine. That is the belief system. That is what all the sort of revelations, the past revelations, were part of to establish that complete relationship and spiritual and liturgical sort of connection to God. That was the whole purpose of all that, was to establish his church in this completeness, and what Christ has established is not to be reformed, not to be changed, altered, or anything. Now, that may upset some people in the West. I understand that. It will upset them, but you need to do your own journey. As I did my own journey when I left atheism and, then had to find, is Eastern Orthodoxy, go back to that, or do I go to some other spiritual, some other type? I went through the motion of going through all these philosophical, religious discussions in my mind. And I was able to settle this. But I can't, you've got the free will and in the end, you have to voluntarily come to God. You can't be forced. I can't propagandize you or force you, or, it shouldn't be threatened. You go voluntarily. That is the whole purpose. It's the reason why even people, when they go as a catacombs into the Eastern Orthodox rites, you don't actually get, like you can go to any other Christian thing and immediately become a Christian. We don't do that. You have to come in and you have to basically learn how to be a Christian, what it means to be a Christian. This is how the early church did it. They brought people in and they spiritually educated them in the faith. Because back in those days, it was all underground, and the only way you could maintain is spiritually educate people exactly what they need to do, all the different rules, everything, the dogmas, the liturgy, how it was supposed to be done, everything. They've actually found recently underground in some sort of caves where Roman soldiers, yes, that have guns and, have knives and stuff like that, and spears and stuff like that. Yes, they were Christians. So, yeah, we're not a pacifist religion. Just remember that. And these people had the altar, they had iconography, they had all that sort of stuff. The early temple, the second temple, had all the iconography and all that sort of stuff. The only person you can't show is the Father. All the other iconography is to basically connect you with that spiritual realm, that noetic world. So there's nothing wrong with that, So that's part of that continuation of, and the priesthood. People say, oh, well, we couldn't maintain the priesthood or whatever. What do you mean you couldn't? You went to Babylon, you're under Babylonian rule, all these sort of things happened to you, Jewish guys, and you couldn't maintain the priesthood. You did maintain it. After the Second Temple, you scattered and basically created religious leaders, no different than an imam or sort of a Protestant type non-priesthood. So it's no different. The priesthood was from the beginning, all the way, from Abraham onwards, all the way. That priesthood was established and was continued by the apostles and onwards. There is a priesthood requirement for it. It's in the scripture itself, Old Testament and New Testament, for the requirement of a priesthood. All the letters that were sent by Paul and Peter and all these sort of things, what are they taught? They're telling exactly how they should be running their churches. That's what they're telling them. This is how we expect you to do it. We've told you to do this. So there's both scriptural underpinnings and there's all this other letters and documents and stuff like that. So it's an oral tradition, as you can see. It's not all written down. So when you discard and you only go to the Bible and you discard all the other traditions, what are you doing? You're losing all that other information that comes through the priesthood. to the lines of the priesthood who are taught orally all these things, the liturgies, the psalm, all the things that they say, all those things. It's just that later on they were sort of put together into a Bible, all the actual stuff. But there's a whole lot of other things that were not, because they're part of church practices and stuff like that. And the same thing existed. A lot of the church practice, the temple practices, they're not in the Torah. Torah's a sort of prophet revelations and stuff like that. How to be a good person, how to connect, have a relationship with God. But there's a whole lot of other things, practices in the actual temple itself that are basically not in the actual, they're actually in religious documents that the priesthood have amongst themselves and their parishioners, how to basically conduct things. So these things are important because Christ said they were important. I didn't say them. Christ said they were important. So why aren't you doing them, you guys in the West? What, your priest is more important than Christ? He's more of an authority? I'd actually have to think about that, wouldn't I? But I'm not trying to be nasty and all that. I'm trying to get you to think, because I had to do the same things. When I came out of my atheism, I had to think about these things, because a lot of you just basically are in what you are because it's just convenient. But God isn't convenient, a convenience store. I get what I need. It's a commitment. It's a loving relationship, So it's not just two people living together. It's a close relationship. It's the same thing with God. It's not just two people knowing each other. It's a close relationship. It's a spiritual relationship. Every night before I go to bed, I talk to God, my God. I pray, I talk, I ask for forgiveness. I regret things that I did, and ask forgiveness for those things because I fucked up again. That's what I do, but I do that privately. It's not for anyone else. Nobody else. This is my relationship, and I maintain a connection with him through his church, and people say, well, there's so many different Orthodox types. Just go and, one that's closest to you in that regard. You don't have to come to mine. I've been to a Serbian church. I've been to a Ukrainian church. I've been to a Russian Orthodox church. I don't have a problem, if I'm in an area where, a Greek Orthodox church isn't close by and there's a different Orthodox church, I'll go to that one. You don't have to go to a specific one. Obviously, if you're in Greece, you'll go to a Greek Orthodox church. If you're in Serbia, you'll go to a Serbian Orthodox church because that's where you're living. That's how it is. How can I put it? Same thing. If you're living in Moscow, you're gonna go there. It's if you're living in America, I think that there is a move now to try and actually bring about some sort of better coordination between the different Orthodox parishes and stuff like that. But the great thing with the Orthodox Church is that there is no one central command. And we don't have a pope. We don't have a central command. It's just there is, like the early church, there was 5 patriarchs: Antioch, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, then came Rome, and then finally came Constantinople. They were the 5. One left, the other 4 stayed. Okay? So that should tell you which left and the other one stayed. The other ones didn't have a problem. They were 4. And because the other one left, that weakened their resolve. And so, rather than being in solidarity and supporting each other, they pretty much started fighting amongst each other, weakened themselves, which allowed, especially in the East, where the majority of Christianity existed, to be annihilated. I mean, 100% of Egyptians were Christians until the Arabization. So disunity will weaken the church, and that's what has happened, unfortunately. In the end, it's up to us to find our way back to the true church. But if you're not convinced from what I've said, that's fine. Try and live a life which is a good life. And if you can live a good life, then I can't say whether you're going to be saved or not. That's not my call. It's above my pay grade. But you've got the option, you've got the possibility of something like that happening. But I'll leave it at that. This was I sort of waffled a bit on some of this religious stuff. The aim of this video is more to focus on, between atheism and God. I think I've given you a general sort of understanding of why, the creator is more plausible from the experimental evidence and the observations that science has made, and how atheism is just a basket case of contradictions and nonsense. And it's the, atheism of the gaps, really, and their make-believe nonsense, because the science is actually contradicting them on every single level. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, obviously people will ask, well, does that mean you're going to have any differences on biology or anything? No. What an atheist believes in terms of the way physiology works, I believe. The way biochemistry works, I believe. Biophysics, because it's all experimentally proven to work that way. Why would I disagree? We just have a different creation belief system. I believe that there is the Logos that spoke the universe into existence, and through the uncreated energies of God is maintained until the end time. They believe that it came about from nothing, accidental. They've got their own theories that they've played around with, which have been proven wrong. They'll continue manifesting new ideas of how it is possible. But in terms of the creation story that we've been stating as Christians, a lot of the observational experimental evidence is pointing more to us, that there is a beginning, a creation of the universe. There is complexity, which they can't explain. There is, information. And we know matter or chemistry cannot create information. I can put a whole lot of chemical compounds in a bucket of water, and you know what? Nothing's going to manifest out of it, because there's no information. Unless you've got information, and unless you've got proteins that have been transcripted to do certain things, we all agree that you need DNA, that binary code of DNA, and to basically, or the equivalent of it, the biological binary code, to basically, transcript all these machines we can use machine tools to create other machines because we are created in the image of God and we have a mind. Well, for those things to happen, you need a mind. They just can't manifest out of nothingness. Their stuff is more, the atheism of the gaps and nonsense and gibberish. Makes no sense that things can just manifest out of just pop into existence with no basis for how this happens, because the onus is on them to prove how this happened. They had some views, multiverse, string theory, supersymmetry. The experimental evidence has just blown that away. So they've got nothing else, and they have only other belief systems that they are trying to peddle with zero experimental evidence. And even, I know some people are going to say, what about Penrose? He talked about recycling universes. Well, for Penrose recycling universes to exist, we would have to ignore some of the experiments that have been done and some of the observations that have been seen, which contradict that idea completely. So he states that at some point in the future, again, Penrose of the gaps, that at some point in the future, there will be new evidence that will allow his theory to become possible. It's basically just, desperation. I can only put it down to desperation, because he himself would agree that the observations are against him. How, you've got instruments that are out there detecting and observing the universe and taking measurements. And those measurements and all that are telling you that your construct and the mathematics behind it do not match reality that's being observed. A bit like this climate stuff, models, rationalist, bullshit models that basically have no relationship to observational reality, let alone there's no way of actually computing most information in the universe or in our atmosphere to be able to tell you really what's happening. It's just basically their belief system. We think this is happening. We think that is happening. So, where's your experimental evidence to show that your assumptions in your models have some validity to experimentation and observation? Zilch. Same thing with Penrose's idea of a recycling universe. Zilch. Same thing with the idea of, a simulation. Zilch. There's a lot of zilch, as you can understand. And it's the same thing when you actually go back to try and work the origin story of life. That area, millions of dollars have been spent and it's got nowhere. It's actually gone backwards, because the more complexity, the more problems they find between structures that exist inside the human body, and they're finding even smaller structures and more complicated, like little machines pulling things up, behaving in a certain way, that even that is, creating more problems for them. They can't even do basic things, let alone try and then build these more complex things. Some people have left the field. I don't blame them. Others are persisting for the simple reason because for them, they can't give up on their atheism. They're trying to find a solution. Again, it's the gap where just say that none of the laws of nature that we know and the behavior of basic matter without information can't manifest anything. You need information. But to have information, you need a mind. Information does not come from, from particles. Information comes from a mind. So knowledge can come from experimental work on particles and stuff like that, knowledge, but not information. There's a difference. Information is something which is encoded in that. Absolute laws, like a strong, weak nuclear force, they don't change. They're actually set like absolute laws. That's not information. That's just absolute laws. We shouldn't confuse the things, because I've heard some people say, well, that's information. No, it's not. That's absolute laws, the way this thing will work, and only work that way. Information is something which describes things and also can provide the coding for certain things to happen, for certain processes to happen that have been determined by that information. Or, so it's a completely different thing. Codified information in organic matter, they can't even put basic chemicals or chemistry together, let alone then run it with information. It's just impossible. Anyway, that's it. I'm out of here. See yous.